So I know you're not a huge Mr. Bungle fan, but they're like one of those bands that's very influential.
I'll say that I'm not even a huge fan. I'm not a fan.
Okay.
But I know you're a huge fan, so let's talk about it.
So you'll put up with it. Well, yeah. just to kind of like satiate people like yourself and show you, and you may or may not have seen this, but I wanted to start this by showing how influential this band was. So this is Brian Headwell.
Up with this, we just wanted to get weird. Another one of our inspirations were a band called Mr. Bungle. Yeah, right? And they were just doing that. You know, I don't even know. Some of those songs are...
So those are the chords to a song by Mr. Bungle called My Ass Is on Fire.
And it sounds like Korn.
Yeah. And so I thought this was so cool because he kind of...
What the hell is that? You know, back in 89 or whatever, it's like...
I love this.
You're used to hair bands on MTV every day. It's all melody or...
hair bands.
You know what I'm saying? And this band's like, and they go, like we went and saw them in Northern California, and they went up on the stage, and they just went. With their masks on, and they stood there for like 10 minutes, just like. We were like, what the hell is this? The crowd started booing them, you know, and they wouldn't, nothing. They didn't even give a rip. They were so weird. And so we got heavily inspired by them. And yes, I'll just say it. We could just rip them off straight. So when we started Blind, you know, we came up with that intro, that weird chord.
So anyway.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's just the depth of Mr. Bungle's influence. So I found this interview with the bass player, the guitar player, Trace Bruance, who also played with Faith No More. It's like this really obscure Australian guy, but it was cool because he talks about a couple interesting things. So I thought I'd just share that. So like basically, I'll just tell you this, Joey, because you know you're here
and everyone else listening.
So basically, Bungle, when they first started, were like a metal band, and they did this demo that was like metal, and then they kind of became something completely different. And so what they're doing now is they're going back and they're playing this demo they made with Scott Ian and Dave Lombardo playing with them. And so this guy basically does this interview. He asks them some really good questions, like why are they doing this? And near the end of it, he kind of hints that like the original lineup of Bungle may get back together and do their stuff, but it's like, anyway, I'll play some of the clips before I yap all night.
What brought you out of hiatus to re-record and release that demo?
Yeah, good question. It's we happened to be Mike, Trevor, and myself were all in the same room for once. Probably it only happened once or something since the band stopped playing in, 2000? In Brooklyn, my band Secret Cheese 3 was opening up for Dead Cross, Mike's band, and Trevor was there because he lives in Brooklyn. And of course, Lombardo was there because he plays in Dead Cross. And, we're all just standing there, and Trevor just was like, hey, what if, because the idea of like doing a reunion was still something that was kind of hazy for all of us. We just hadn't really talked about it, and just seemed kind of not in the cards. And he just floated this idea of what if we did that, go back, all of that music that people don't know about us. They don't think that we're really a death metal band, or they think that it was like, we're just kind of joking about that or something. Why don't we go back and really do that music justice with this guy on drums? That was the original spark, So it was like, that idea just took, you know what I mean? Like we were all inspired by that and couldn't stop thinking about it after that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So he goes on to talk about how, like, if you listen to Mr. Bungle's like early stuff, it's very complex and there's a lot of different elements at play. But this stuff is pretty easy for them to play with, just two guitarists, a bass player, a drummer, and a singer. But the guy also asked him how Scott Ian got into it, and I thought this was also noteworthy.
Before, when talking about meeting up with the crew to discuss the reformation or the reunion, that Dave Lombardo's in the mix. Now there's also another new face quite prominent for Wrath of the Easter Bunny or the Raging Wrath. That'd be Mr. Scott Ian. So how did he get involved, and what's it like being sharing guitar duties with him?
Yeah, I mean, it was that thing of like, I just said this to somebody else, but it's like, if you were to ask us in 1985, just take Mike, Trevor, and myself aside and said, hey, if you could have your dream drummer, dream guitar player, who would they be for this death metal band playing this band? It would absolutely be Dave Lombardo and Scott Ian. No doubt about it. Like, there's no doubt about that. So, like, when the idea came up in Brooklyn to do this again, of course, the next question a few months down the road was, who are we going to get to play the other guitar? We didn't have a second guitar originally, but, that's just because I was overdubbing. And then we didn't stick with that music long enough to play it live very much, so it never came up. But it was, this is an issue. You got to have a second guitar. And I think it was Patton was like, what about Scott Ian? He knew him. Turns out when we got a hold of him, he actually had a cassette copy of that demo. Like, he had our demo and he had listened to it back in the 80s. You know what I mean? Like, so I'm saying there's like a few crowds that had that demo in the tape trading circuit that were metalheads, So that was like a really great acknowledgement from him. Like, and he was down to do it. So it was unbelievable.
Scott Ian seems like the coolest dude.
Wow. Who keeps cassettes for decades?
Mr. Bungle fans are insane. And this guy, he kind of touches on it a little bit. Like, back in the day, like, you knew who was like really into music. If you're like, oh, Mr. Bungle, they're like, oh, you like Bungle? It was like almost like one of those unspoken things, like people who know. And so there were these websites, because Bungle would do like random covers live. So that, like, there were like cult following websites that compiled all these recordings, and you could buy the tapes, you could download the covers. They documented all this stuff. So that is why Scott probably had the demo, because he was just a nerd about it. But in this clip, this guy talks about the fan thing I was just talking about a little bit, and they go a little bit into
kind of one of those litmus test bands. When you're chatting with someone and first sort of scoping them out in their the music that they listen to and what bands they like, and if you mention Mr. Bungle and you see that little spark of recognition, you're like, yeah, this dude knows what's going on. And then on top of that, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, we pretty much just had the self-titled. We had Disco Volante. The California was the last major record you guys released. But outside of that, to hear anything else that it was trawling through the early internet using sites like Bungle Fever to find those demos and be able to get a chance to listen to, I guess, the original recordings of Wrath. I guess these days kids could probably just find it on YouTube. But back in the day, like, to dive that little bit deeper into Mr. Bungle took a bit of effort.
Yeah, like, you music nerd guys. I mean, it was great because those sites were available for people to do that kind of digging, and we ended up getting a pretty good chunk of really diehard fans from people digging around, doing their sleuthing about all of the different little tentacles, of unreleased Mr. Bungle stuff, which there's millions of. Like, I didn't realize, I was looking at one of those things a few years ago, and somebody had added up like all the cover songs that we had done. I was like, I don't know, like hundreds of them, like just hundreds and hundreds of fucking cover songs. It was mind blowing. Like, but then it made me realize, like, oh wait, if I was a fan, this would be totally overwhelming. Like, I don't even remember doing half of this shit.
I mean, even like just.
It's crazy that he doesn't remember. Like, they've done so many covers, he doesn't remember.
Wow.
So I lied. I have one final clip for this, and he just talks about kind of like why the band broke up and like where they're at now,
Threw out those records.
and then we'll move on
Yeah,
to
we
Metallica.
have lots of issues, us guys.
Hey, but that's art, right? That's art.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess in our way, we were dysfunctional as people towards each other, which we've now made a lot of progress on. But it's interesting to see the way some of that stuff comes out. You're not communicating directly, but stuff is coming out through it's like you plugged up the reservoir, the psychic reservoir, but it's coming out in your art, right? I mean, that's a very...
So before this, he's like, Mr. Bungle is very dark, but he's talking about how their anger at each other like manifested in their music.
kind of a problem. It's a problem that fucking broke the band up, to be totally honest with you. But in the end, it's also part of the process of growing. And we're still friends. We've reconvened, and there's a beauty to having made it through all of that too. That's to me the best part about being in this band now is the fact that the friendships are real. We're not fucking hiding our feelings from each other. We're not, the resentments aren't like building up over here and then, coming out in music over here. None of this bullshit. There's a lot of bullshit in art is what I'm telling you. I mean, and we're as guilty of it as the next artist. One of the reasons I embraced this era so wholeheartedly, even though the goalposts are musically much narrower than they were before, is because the train is on the fucking right track for once. It's very things are fleshed out. Everything is discussed maturely. It's pretty great. It's pretty great. I'm very happy to have my friends back. You know what I'm saying?
A couple days ago, just to close this out, they posted a picture of all 5 original members at a table together. So is that a teaser that maybe they're gonna like because all the fans are dying for them to tour and play like the early stuff,
Sure.
like Disco Volante, and to see them do that live again would be amazing right now. But fingers crossed, we'll see.
Well, I hope for your sake it happens.
I hope for your sake it happens. I'm kidding. Okay.